Maze, how you feeling today?
Doing okay. Fun weekend of football. It's that time of year. It's a lot, but it's a heck of a time.
Oh, it's a beautiful time. That's for sure. It gets depressing, though. Waddle and I were reflecting on this on Friday when there were 7 left. But now when we go and we're like, there's only 3 games left, it's a little depressing, isn't it?
I actually love it because when we do our prep for our preview podcasts, and it just gets on top of you real fast. Because when there's 6 games, it's like, I got to watch how many games to prep for this? Like 6 teams, 2 games, it just gets completely out of hand. So getting to focus on 2 games this Sunday between arguably the 4 best teams in the league, I like that it narrows the focus a little bit.
Don't dismiss also the USFL starts quickly after. So
you guys are sickos, and I appreciate you, but I will not be watching a single second of the USFL.
Yeah. I may turn it on, but I'm not. I will dismiss it. I will dismiss it. All right, May. So let's go to the Schefter report and something that you brought up to us. What do you think the realistic possibility of the Packers trading Aaron Rodgers is?
I think it seems realistic. I mean, the financials of it make sense, like I laid out there, which I'm glad you guys replayed that, so I got to remember what the details were because I don't have those just bouncing around in my head. I understand if you're Green Bay because at a certain point, I think you don't really want to do this anymore. He's 38 years old, I believe. I know obviously you played at an MVP level for 2 of the last 3 years. You've been a really, really good team, but at a certain point, you're going to need to turn the page. That's going to happen, and you have a guy on the roster that you're going to have to make a decision about here pretty soon. And I don't know what they're going to do with Jordan Love's 5th-year option. With the potential Rodgers move hanging over them. There's a lot to untangle. And I can understand if you're Green Bay just saying, you know what, now is the time. We didn't make the playoffs this year. This is a team that we feel like we can retool a little bit, but we can't necessarily run every aspect of it back. They're just in a tough spot, and they have been for the last couple of years. And if you're Brian Gutekunst, I can understand just looking at the entire landscape of this and saying, it's time. It's time for us to just move on, hit reset, and figure out whatever the next chapter of this looks like.
Waddle and I are on the opposite ends of this as Bears fans about how we feel as Bears fans. For me, I want the Packers to have Aaron Rodgers next year. And I say this because, the Bears aren't still going to be very good. So I want them to drag their feet on getting on with their next guy. I want them to be stuck in the middle because if they move on to Jordan Love, there may be a chance that they may stink and maybe they will be in competition to have a high draft pick next year and find their solution. If Rodgers is there, there's a better chance of them being 9-8, 8-9 again, being stuck in the middle, trying to figure out who their solution is, maybe push down the road even further. Waddle thinks there's a better chance that if they keep them, that they are good. As a Bears fan, Maze, what do you want them to do if you're rooting?
I like where your head's at. I also think that if they keep him, they might be more inclined to make some risky financial decisions in order to get the most out of next year's roster and potentially appease him. So I feel like there's a couple different things in play there. I don't think the Bears are going to be good enough next year to worry about being competitive with the Packers in any respect. So I'd be more concerned with them hamstringing themselves for the long term than anything else.
Who could actually take on that contract? And what do you believe, Robert, would be the value of him in a trade? What would the Packers get back?
It's a great question. I think the first question is more teams than you think. Because based on my understanding of the financials, if a team trades for him, I believe it's after June 1st, I think he only has a $16 million cap hit this year.
And let me interject this real quick, Robert. You probably know this much better than I. You could trade him before June 1st, but with a June 1st designation, right? Can't you get around that these days?
I don't believe so.
You can't.
I think that with a trade, it's different than a cut.
Gotcha.
By cutting someone, you can designate someone as a post-June 1st cut before that.
Gotcha.
For salary cap purposes. I do not think that's the case with the trade. I might be wrong about that, but I think that's true. So you'd have to wait a little bit longer, which is going to be a question because obviously a team probably wants to know whether he's going to be their quarterback before that. But if you trade for him after that date, I believe it's only a $16 million cap hit this year, and it's a $32 million cap hit next year. It goes up much higher than that in year 3, but the dead money left on the deal after 2 years is probably palatable if you wanted to move on. He has, I believe, $20 million total in signing bonus that the Packers owe him over the next couple of years. So that's why he would be cheaper for a team acquiring him than he would be for Green Bay. So if you're a team with draft capital and you want a 2-year window to get the most out of it, I think it's more than tolerable what you'd have to pay him against the cap. It becomes a question of how much you want to give up in picks. And I mean, it feels like it'd be at least a first round, probably 2, to go get him. And then you have to ask if that's worth it.
So like the Jets, the Titans,
That's what
perhaps?
I keep coming back to.
Yeah. What about the Titans?
Yeah, potentially. The Titans are in such an interesting spot. I mean, with everything that's going on with their offensive staff and kind of how they're retooling, they almost seem like they're in this transition period where they're going to have to remake a lot of that offense. If you look at Taylor Lewan's contract, they can get out from under it after this season. I guess it already is after this season, but you can get out from under it for nothing this year. Their offensive line is, really unproven / uncertain. I believe that Ben Jones might be a free agent. They're starting center. Other than that, they don't really have any established starters. Their right tackle was a rookie 3rd-round pick this year who didn't play very well. They don't really have any playmakers outside of Treylon Burks. Like, they're not this ready-made team with Aaron Rodgers. With the Jets, it's easier to make that argument. You have Elijah Moore. You have who's the first round? Garrett Wilson. I'm sorry. You have Garrett Wilson. You have an offensive line that needs to be better, but you have the guys in-house. Theoretically, we'll see what happens with Mekhi Becton, but they've signed a couple guys on the interior. I think they're a play caller and a quarterback away from being a really competitive team. And I think the timeline would have to look something like that if you were going to make a move like this. That's why a team like the Jets makes the most sense.
Yeah, I'd like to see Aaron Rodgers and Mike Vrabel go at it for an entire season. I wonder the dynamic that would exist between the two of them in Nashville.
It's a great question.
Yeah,
it's a great question. If Aaron Rodgers, you watch Aaron Rodgers practice, it's pretty serious business. I think that's kind of what's important to Mike Vrabel. Is part of the reason that the Julio Jones relationship didn't go super great, because Julio at that stage in his career with his body, I don't think going hard at practice every day was his favorite thing. But with Rodgers, I think that dynamic might be a little bit more tolerable on both sides.
All right, what did you see this weekend that excited you most or stuck with you the most?
I think what Cincinnati did, having 3 offensive linemen out and them looking like the team that was better equipped up front on both sides of the ball, I thought was pretty incredible. And their ability to kind of be this team at this stage, go back and you look at the beginning of the season, the first month of the season, I was worried. I was worried that they looked at the offseason and said, all we need to do is have minor upgrades at 3 offensive line spots and we're going to be just fine. Nothing else needs to change. And it felt like all of the ills that they had beyond the offensive line talent were showing up. They had this siloed offense where every time they were under center, they'd run the ball, and their run game was really predictable. I was like, man, this could be a disappointing season. And then in week 5, they play the Ravens, and they undergo this pretty radical transition where they are essentially just playing from the shotgun. And they start folding in a lot more gap scheme runs, and they start to understand what their offensive line personnel should look like. And they're coming up with all of these kind of counters and haymakers to their established concepts on offense. And my opinion of their offensive staff and just the job that those guys have done did a total 180 from even where it was last year when they went to the Super Bowl. And I feel like what you saw yesterday was a culmination of that, where they really got to show some flourishes at the end with 3 backups in there and owning every aspect of the game. And on the other side of the ball, I think Lou Anarumo, their defensive coordinator, is as good as anybody. I mean, anybody in maybe the non-Bill Belichick kind of realm of things right now on that side of the ball. The game plan he trotted out yesterday, you combine that with what he did to Mahomes in last year's playoffs and what he's done to a bunch of really good quarterbacks over the last couple of years. I just could not be more impressed with the staff in place there and the quarterback that they have. I think he's real. I think he's going to be around for a very long time. We're talking non-Mahomes division. I think he's probably the guy I'd rather have next. And I just didn't think I would be saying that by the end of this year, but I think I have to now.
Just a kind of an observation on my behalf. Sylvia and I were on the same page with this. Don't recall I've ever seen a team with the game, circumstances what they were. 40 seconds to go at the end of the first half. The Bengals are on their own 10 in those conditions, and they let Joe Cool rip it. And I mean, they were lower risk passes. I get it. He was getting the ball out to his running backs, but can you recall a scenario where something like it just shows you how confident they are in him and how confident he is? But you recall seeing something like that in such an important game?
No. And I think it speaks to how much control he had the entire game. It didn't really seem to matter what they were doing to him. what sort of late rotations he was seeing, what sort of disguises he was seeing. He's just so incredibly dialed in right now. It's unbelievable to watch. And the relationship that he has with that staff is really interesting. I think that they've given him a lot of ownership and leeway. If you look at the way the offense was built his rookie year, they really were just trying to let him operate in the same way he did at LSU to make him comfortable. And there were aspects of what they were trying to do last year that they just kind of threw in the trash can because he didn't want to do them. So I think they've really let him steer this thing, and even his kind of maturation and evolution in that way, where in the first month of the year, he was just getting bored. Teams are playing all this cover 2 against him and daring him to play quarterback and be patient. And, he just wants it all the time, always. And his willingness to say, you know what, if you're going to try to put me in this box, I'm just going to be the best possible quarterback in this box. And he's earned that trust because of the way that he's handled every single bump in the road like that.
And they're super hot, and they're going to Kansas City, who they're 3-0 against with Burrow as their quarterback. And now Mahomes has the high ankle sprain. Do you think Kansas City will have enough from Mahomes to beat them?
I don't know if they'll have enough to beat them. I think they'll have enough to stay in the game. What I'm curious about is now how that dictates. Now we're getting way ahead of ourselves. It's still 6 days away, but how that dictates the way that Kansas City or the way that Cincinnati plays. Because teams played a lot of man coverage against the Chiefs all season because they just weren't afraid of their pass catchers. And outside of Travis Kelce, why would you be? One of the biggest downsides of that is if you're playing man coverage on third down, he can devastate you scrambling. And if you're not worried about him moving around, does that change how aggressive you are in some of those moments? So I think that it makes you a little bit more one-dimensional in terms of how many ways he can hurt you, but he can still hurt you from the pocket. We saw that this weekend. So I think Patrick Mahomes, unable to move, is still probably like the second or third best quarterback in the league. So I still think they have enough. It just depends on what the game ultimately looks like.
How about the other game, the NFC title game, from a different number of angles, Robert? How about, what the Eagles have done with Jalen Hurts, and should Bears fans be looking at that as kind of the blueprint for what they should be trying to do? And it may take some time, but that's what they should be able to do. And what the 49ers have been able to do, getting back to the NFC title game for the third consecutive year, this time with a rookie who was the last pick of the draft.
I think that the Jalen Hurts blueprint is obviously the best one, but you need to understand that the Bears are like 2 or 3 steps away from where the Eagles were last year. Even last season, where they did not throw the ball very often and Devontae Smith was their best weapon. They still had Dallas Goedert. They still had Devontae Smith, and they still had arguably the best offensive line in football last year. And that's something they could just build upon. Really the only thing they needed to do on offense, personnel-wise, was go get A.J. Brown. Other than that, this team was already ready-made, and then A.J. Brown was kind of the last piece to accelerate that final step, or maybe the 4th of 5 steps for Jalen Hurts' development. The Bears are starting from square one, and it's going to be multiple years before they're even the 2021 Eagles. So even if it's kind of the shining light of how to do this, I still think that it's important to be realistic. But what they've done around him and just what they've done team building wise, period. The act of drafting Jalen Hurts when you already had Carson Wentz and saying, maybe we give ourselves a little out here. Maybe we create a little trap door in this financially, and we give ourselves an off ramp if this Carson Wentz thing doesn't work out. And what that's done for them, it's changed the entire trajectory of their franchise. The moves that they've made just subtly, moving back from the 6th overall pick in that 2020 draft or 2021 draft to go to 10 and pick up an extra first round pick in the process and get Devontae Smith still instead of Jalen Waddle, and then have an extra first to go trade it for A.J. Brown, to trade another first and have that one this year that belongs to New Orleans. Like the amount of flexibility that team creates and how often they're turning over rocks personnel wise. Linval Joseph trading for CJ Gardner-Johnson, going to get James Bradbury. Like, Howie Roseman is better at this than most people. And I think that you see the gains of that consistently. And they have arguably the best coaching staff in the league right now. The flexibility that they've shown. Flexibility is like the key word. And their ability to show that off all the time has made them a juggernaut. And then in San Francisco, it's insane. I mean, they have the best defense in the league. They've had the best defense in the league for the last couple of years. The personnel they have on that side of the ball is remarkable. And then what you look at on offense, the most impressive thing to me is that this is kind of like the final vision of what Kyle Shanahan wants and wanted to play with. And the evolution of Brandon Ayuk and the acquiring of Christian McCaffrey has allowed that to happen. If you go look at the offensive coaching staff that the Niners had in 2021 at the end of the season, and you look at it now, none of the assistants are the same. Half of them went to go work with Mike McDaniel in Miami. A couple retired. Kyle Shanahan turned over his entire offensive staff, and with the last pick in the draft, has built arguably the most dangerous offense in the league.
It's crazy. Yeah.
He is a one-of-one person. Yeah. And you are seeing that right now, and combined with arguably the best defense in the league, guys, they have the Mr. Irrelevant as their starting quarterback. When the playoffs started, they were the betting favorite to come out of the NFC.
He's going to lose.
Unbelievable.
He's going to lose his second DC in the last 3 years too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that his ability to refresh the pipeline with these guys has been really impressive. Eventually, I think, especially on the defensive side of the ball, brain drain will come for you because he can't stem the tide. On offense, he can just kind of be like, I'm at the center of this. Like, even if the guys around me change, I can still carry the weight. On defense, I think that ultimately you're going to have one of these guys that's not quite as good as the others. But I guess we'll have to believe it when we see it, because so far he's done just fine.
Do you have any free agent names for us for the Bears? As free agency starts, they've got the most cap room. Any guys on your radar that they should definitely pinpoint?
The one guy that I think is really interesting, speaking of the Niners, and this is like a one tier down guy, is Charles Omenihu, who was on the Texans, and the Niners traded for him mid-season last year, late in the season. I want to say it was like a 6th round pick. Really long, and he plays inside outside for San Francisco. If you look at his like rate stats, so pass rush win rate, all that kind of stuff, they're promising. And because he has that inside outside versatility, there used to be a thing that John Hollander used to talk about called the Millsap doctrine in basketball analytics, where if you have high efficiency numbers with fewer minutes, when you crank up those minutes, the efficiency should theoretically stay. So when you have these pass rushers that are part-time players, you hope that if you increase their role, they're still a version of the same player. So he'd be a guy I'd find interesting in that way. James Bradbury is a free agent. James Bradbury, I think, is going to be 29. I thought he was fantastic this year. So guys like that maybe aren't at the top of the market, but are still worth going after. I would worry about guys like Daron Payne. The contracts where you're resetting the positional market because you're a 25-year-old former first-round pick whose team can't retain him because of ways they've spent elsewhere, that gets a little bit worrying to me. So I wouldn't want to shop for the most expensive guys possible. I'd want to find the right guys, and I assume Ryan Poles is thinking about it that way too.
Robert, would you be concerned at all about Omenihu because he's on a line of so many talented players that ultimately he's the beneficiary of not being focused on as much as some of the others?
Not necessarily. I think that when you talk to guys there and when you hear them talk about it, a lot of why they're unlocked in San Francisco is because of the way that they're coached. I remember Samson Ebukam, who is in that team now, and he actually came from Los Angeles. He was on the Rams for his rookie contract. In training camp this year, he was talking about how playing for Chris Kasurek, who's the defensive line coach in San Francisco, he's like, if I had this guy from day one, my career would have been entirely different. And even guys who have been good there and moved on have still had some success. You watch Arden Key and what he was like for the Jags this year, and I thought he was a really useful player. And obviously there's a line in the sand that you don't want to go above for any of these free agents, but if Omenihu is looking for rotational pass rusher money, guys like that are who I'd be after. If you look at the history of free agency and contracts that ultimately end up being successful, like middle round plug and play starter contracts are typically where you're happiest. Every once in a while, there are exceptions, like the Hassan Reddick contract this year being the most obvious one. But even that is a $15 million a year deal. Nick Bosa is about to make $30 million a year as he resets the edge rusher market. So I'd be looking to shop in that aisle over the who's the most expensive guys I can find.
There's another name. I'm not a Mike McGlinchey guy. I'm not an offensive line expert, but he's going to be a name out there as a free agent. What are your thoughts on McGlinchey?
I think he's been up and down. He's also dealt with a lot of injuries for his career. Even if he's been on the field, he's had some nagging stuff to deal with. There are some other offensive linemen I think I'd potentially be more interested in on the market. Josh Hyman is probably the guy I would point to. I mean, he's somebody that has played left tackle in the NFL at a fairly high level. Those guys don't really become available. The only reason he is because he plays on a team with David Bakhtiari. And that'll depend on what you think of Braxton Jones and whether you want him to be a left tackle moving forward, all that kind of stuff. But I think the offensive line group is interesting if you're looking for the right type of guys. If you're looking for those $7 to $8 million a year players who are just starters for you because you don't want any weak links, I think that's a smart way to build a unit like that.
All right, and before we let you go, as Robert Mays joins us, who are the Bears going to trade down with? Make your prediction today. As you know, you were all over the Rodgers trade possibility. Who are the Bears trading with?
It'll depend on what they ultimately want to do and where they see the in the draft as. You know, if they're sitting there looking at, because teams are good at this. Teams are good at tiering where the talent drops in the draft are. So if they think we have to leave this draft with Jalen Carter or Will Anderson no matter what, then I don't think you want to go down further than 4. I don't love that line of thinking, but I can understand why a team would do that. So if that's the case, then maybe it's the Colts. If it's not, and you're a team like Carolina, do you think we need to go get our guy this year? Like, this is the year we can do this. We have extra draft picks in the McCaffrey trade. Like, let's go take a huge swing for our new coach. Then I think that would be the other team I would come back to. But the Colts and the Panthers feel like the two most logical ones.
And finally, where is your optimism level with Justin Fields and the Bears quarterback?
I want to see what happens. I want to see what happens with better players. That's kind of where I'm at. You know, I've always been worried about the internal clock mechanism and the amount of sacks he takes. That is something that a quarterback owns more than people like to admit, is how you create your own pressure. And I think that it is an underlying skill. For everyone that's trying to make comparisons with Justin Fields and some of the other quarterback development success stories that we've seen over the last couple of years, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, go look at the sack rates for Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, even when they weren't playing quarterback very well, even when the other numbers weren't great and the passing statistics weren't good. It was still a lot better than what you're looking at with Justin Fields. So that still gives me pause, even when you consider how bad the surroundings were. I want to see if that issue can start to be mitigated if you have receivers he trusts, if you have an offensive line that can function. So I'm curious. I'm obviously excited by a lot of the stuff he did, but I think that there's still a lot of stuff you'd want to see if you were a Bears fan and if you were the Bears organization.
Give me like a huge punch in the face this entire interview. And it's going to be years before they turn it around. And anyway,
you want honesty from him, don't you?
No, that's why I love Mays. Look, it's all great food for thought. Robert, great stuff. Keep up the good work, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk before the Super Bowl.
Thanks, Robert.
Absolutely. Talk to you guys anytime.
All right, there you go, Robert Mays.